Hello, everybody, and welcome to All Points Ahead. This is Carrie Tulin, principal of All Points Ahead, which is a firm that supports nonprofit organizations with consulting, leadership coaching, and interim services. And of course, as we know, planned giving is such an integral part of a thriving nonprofit environment. Not only is it transformational for the organization, but it's such a transformational experience for the donor as well to make that ultimate life gift to an organization or to causes that they cherish and support. And it's because of my passion for planned giving in the nonprofit sector. In fact, I'm a certified specialist in planned giving that I'm so excited to have a very special guest with us today. And that is Samantha Potter with Rubicon's Edge Consulting. And Samantha is certified as a Life Threshold Transformational Coach, an Energy Medicine Practitioner, and a Death Doula. And after more than 25 years as a senior paralegal specializing in estate planning and probate, and then also she received, or she's a cancer survivor, stage 3 cancer survivor, which also redefined her life's work. So I think Samantha's going to share some really amazing insights with us in just sharing her story and her experiences. So, Samantha, welcome and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. You have an uninvited guest is joining us, and you might hear him in the background. He's irritated that I closed the window this morning. but yeah, thanks. I'm excited to be here and chat with you, Carrie.
Excellent, excellent. So I gave a very high level overview of extensive decades long experience. So could you take a few minutes and just share with our listeners a little bit about your journey from being a registered paralegal in estate planning and probate to becoming a transformational coach and an end of life doula?
So yeah, it was unexpected. This wasn't a planned, this will be a nice retirement gig, because I've been working you know, I've been working basically in the death industry, right? Planning for
Mhm.
death and helping the families, with the estates after death, uh, and talking to clients about what do you want to happen when you die. And uh, for a quarter of a century, then I was hit with a stage 3 cancer diagnosis, which just kind of went, whoa. you know, uh, so that kind of existential uh, you know, just wrestling with, all right, I don't have a terminal diagnosis, but I am nearing retirement age at the time. Uh, what am I going to do with my life? And it was pure. Well, I think it was kind of a message to me. I I stumbled across a friend of a friend's profile on social media, identified that they were a death doula. Um, and I'd never heard of that. And so I did some research and thought, this is like a segue meant for me, not so much to have continuing, my own business after I retire from the corporate legal world, but this is a way that I can take the skills that I learned, um, all of those, the legal and the knowledge and the financial of what has to be put together to ideally, plan for one's death, what it looks like when you don't, because we had a lot of those, intestate situations that we dealt with in probate, and take that knowledge and with some additional training, turn it into the more supportive, holistic, emotional, social, psychological, and add in the logistical to support clients at death. Um, and it really did become kind of my life purpose. And I did the trainings, and uh, some of them while undergoing cancer treatment, and opened my business thinking, well, I'll just get things ready, and I'll just have like this ready to go for when I retire some years down the road. And clients started coming to me. They heard, that, and so I was juggling full-time work and the my business, my side gig at the time, and it really did become a kind of my life purpose, and folded in the coaching aspect of it simply at the request of clients, families, and my friends and acquaintances who said, I love what you're doing here. I can see the good. I'm not dying, but I'm really going through some of these same changes, these same, this existential reckoning of my life has changed. What am I going to do now? So my business has kind of grown organically. It was, I like to say, thrust upon me. Um, I know, Carrie, you've heard this metaphor, but some of your listeners might not have. But if you don't listen to your intuition, or if you're not following kind of where you need to be, you're paying attention to your own inner self, life has a tendency to give you warnings, to kind of knock gently on the door, and they can come in the method of, the metaphor is a feather, a brick, and a truck. So a feather is just kind of a whisper. Somebody says something you hear passing on the street that sounds intriguing, but you don't follow up on it. A brick is, you get hit by something, but it's painful but easily recovered from, or you get hit by the truck. The cancer diagnosis was my truck, and when I look back over my life, I've had lots of trucks, and so leaning into uh catching it before it becomes a brick has been a learning experience for me, but I'm getting better at that. And so instead of saying to the people who said, well, I'm not dying, but I don't like where I'm at, and saying, that's really too bad. I don't have the credentials to support you in that. I went and got the credentials, and uh, now, to be honest, my coaching, on top of the credentials that I have, the certifications and things, trained coach. Well, and to be honest, being a death doula is kind of the ultimate coaching anyway. My coaching programs are really very much informed by my work with my dying clients. It's just in a different setting. You can approach it slightly differently because we're not coming at it from, this is the final decision I'm going to make, but learn how to take what life throws at you, whether it's a feather or a brick or a truck, and roll with it. Know where you are. So it's just kind of how I got into it. It was decades of doing a job that I loved and was very skilled at, and then getting hit by a truck saying you might not be able to work at all ever again, or you know you're already in your 60s, even if without this diagnosis, how much time do you have left to really do anything?
Mhm. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. I have so many questions bouncing in my brain right now. Um, so actually what I'd love to do is I'd like to explain for our listeners the role of a death doula, but also then I would love to circle back to the feather brick truck and how your coaching techniques for individuals who need to, in some ways, wake up to a life transition. So I'm giving you a preview of the next question,
Okay.
but for now, because like you were saying, you had never heard of Death Doula, and then you saw it, social media post, friend of a friend. I too was unfamiliar, and for me, as we've talked about previously, is unfortunately I have had a lot of loved ones pass over the decades. So I'm familiar with the process of losing loved ones. I've lost them to long debilitating illnesses. I've lost someone debilitating illness plus dementia. So I know how challenging it is to watch a loved one go through that. And had I known that death doulas existed or end of life doulas, it would have been such an amazing, extraordinary service, not just for my loved ones, but also to help the families. So can you share just a quick or high level kind of what does a death doula do and your process with that?
So I'll preface this with the death doula does what the client needs and wants.
Mhm.
So some clients have parts of their lives altogether, they're not interested in it. But the broad overview of what I can bring to a person who's received a terminal diagnosis is ideally they connect with support early. Uh, they realize that, so you might get a terminal diagnosis that your prognosis is 2 years, right? Or it might be 2 months. Um, or you might have one of those long lingering diseases that it's not officially terminal, but you're never coming out of it, Parkinson's, ALS, these types of neurological diseases that's what you're going to die of unless you do literally get hit by that truck. And so the process typically starts with what we call a structured life review, which is not an autobiography. I don't ask you to tell me your story. It's me asking questions and drilling down into important events and phases of your life uh, where you felt most like yourself or you felt the opposite, unsure of what was going on. But those real kind of pivotal moments in everyone's life, and they're different for everybody. I honestly don't have a formula of questions to say, ask these. It's you start the conversation, and it's a lot of really drilling down. How did that make you feel at the time? And what do you think of that now? And looking back, what would you have done differently? And tell me more and tell me more. So that by the time we get done, the client, I don't tell them what their life purpose was. They have reconstructed it themselves. And they know that their life had worth and it had meaning. And that's true of everybody. I don't care what your life circumstances were. Um, we all are inherently perfect. And we're here to live a life. And some are harder than others. And some are more flamboyant and obviously, in the public eye, and others are just quiet and it's just your close circle. But they're all precious and wonderful. And that kind of answers that first big question that I was met with my cancer diagnosis of what have I been doing? Why am I here? Yeah, I do a good job. I'm a valued employee. I've raised my family, I'm loved, I have friends, but what's the purpose? There is no purpose other than just you were here. You are the purpose. So we do the structured life review. Some clients want to leave something behind to be remembered by. And so we can dig into what we call a legacy project. It can be a memoir, an autobiography. It can be a memory box, just, those things that are precious to you. It can be something as simple as a quilt made out of grandma's aprons, right? Or a family recipe book. Um, or it can be something as extravagant as a public art installation if you're an artist. It's like, I don't do the things, but I help you pick out what's important to you and what will be relevant to you, and you know the type of legacy you want to leave. Some people just want to leave their love for their family, and so writing letters into the future for the kids and grandkids. Some people want the world to remember them. So, we kind of plan that, and I can do some logistical, on the ground stuff, but I'm not like in charge of it. We turn that over to the family if it can't be done before the client passes. Um, and then there's a lot of just being there. Even if the client doesn't want to write a biography, an autobiography, or a memoir, they have so many stories, that sometimes these are stories that the friends and family have heard over and over and over again. But being that open, receptive ear, and it just, they know it's landed. And sometimes facing death pulls out stories that you've never had the courage to tell anybody. And and they might not be spectacular or shocking things. It's just those quiet little moments that you weren't sure anybody would even care about, but they meant something to you. And so there are a lot of things and projects a death doula can do depending on the circumstances. We can, and in my particular case, I don't give legal advice, but I have the background that I can say, you have to have an advance directive. You need a durable power of attorney for financial stuff. In some cases, a will is not necessary. If you don't own real property, and the family knows who gets what, okay. You don't have to go through probate in Washington. There are other, and I only work the doula business locally. So I'm located in Eastern Washington. But, you know, if you have a trust, if you have a will, have you looked at it lately? Does it say what you want it to say? Do you have beneficiary designations on, you know, investments and retirement accounts that match your plan for your final disposition? Because the will says one thing, the beneficiary things say the other thing. So if the bulk of your assets are in beneficiary designations, it doesn't matter what your will says, right? Because those go straight to the beneficiary. Does your life insurance match? So I can just take a quick look through the documents and say in real words, this is what's going to happen. If that's not what you want, you need to get back to your attorney and, do that. Or if you don't have what we call the life documents, the advance directives, the powers of attorney for health and for financial aspects. And what does that mean to give that right to somebody? And you have to have the conversation with them of, these are my desires, and letting the attorney, in fact, the person you pick, know this is your legal requirement to do this, this, and this. This is not your decision. This is you stepping into the shoes of whoever appointed you. And you need to make the decisions based on their values and their wishes and their best interests. So those are some really hard conversations some people have never had. They say, oh, they know what I want. Do they really? You are not doing your loved ones any favors if you land in the ER and the doctor's asking for permission to intubate or to do, emergency surgery, and you don't know. You know that mom or dad has a terminal diagnosis, but what's the right thing to do? If you haven't had that conversation, the only way you know what's right is not what you feel, but what you know that, your loved one who's dying wants. And there's no right or wrong answer. Some people want every available medical intervention, and other people say, I'm dying. If I can die sooner without the pain, let me go, right? And everything in between.
Yeah.
So that is kind of a broad overview of what we do while the client is still active, I guess you'd call, while they still have the energy and the capacity to make decisions and do planning. And then the final kind of planning thing we do is we plan the end. What do you want it to look like while you're dying? Do you want to die at home, if possible? It's not always possible. But if at all possible, do you want to stay at home? More than 80% of the people polled say, I want to die at home. And yet it's something like only, and don't hold me to these statistics, but it's something really big, like a 13% of people have an advance directive, so that, or a healthcare proxy, so that somebody can legally make those decisions for them. But the vast majority of people do want to die at home. They want to be comfortable. Of course you do. You don't want to be in pain, but you want to die at home. And so the the so we plan, what do you want it to look like? Do you want to be surrounded by the kids and the grandkids and the pets? And do you want it to be a joyful time? Do you want your favorite music playing? And here's something that shocked me when I actually started my practice, because when you think of like a bedside vigil while you're waiting for somebody to die, you're thinking of the movies. Well, unless you've had a lot of experience, but you're thinking of solemn, quiet, low light. If music's playing, it's orchestral or classical, maybe a hymn, hushed tones. But music is the one thing that we all have, and hearing is the last sense to go. And so when I ask clients, what do you want to be playing while you're dying? You're likely going to be non-responsive for hours to days if you're dying at home. But you can still hear, and you might be able to flicker your eyes or squeeze somebody's hand a little bit, but you're not really connected, but you're hearing. What do you want to hear? Uh, I am firmly a boomer. I was born in the 50s, okay? Late 50s, but still 50s. So it was a bit of a shock to me to realize that the music, I knew this intellectually, but the music people want playing on their deathbed is the Rolling Stones or the Beatles or Bon Jovi, or it's the music of your youth that you are most connected to. Now, there are exceptions. There are people who love classical or opera or whatever. But I have to admit that unless I'm spending time with my granddaughter, I don't know what popular music sounds like today.
Mm-hmm.
I listen to the music of my formative years. It's not just my teens and 20s, but it's the comfortable music. So it's a lot of clients are going out to a playlist of, classic rock and roll, and depending on their interests, it could be, really hard, acid rock, or it could be more like the Billy Joel or the folk rock, the Mamas and the Papas and that kind of thing. And it was I understood it the minute I thought about it, but it was a surprise to me the first time that came up. It was like,
Mm-hmm.
oh boy, am I getting old. You know? And culture changes. And music is the one thing that we all carry with us throughout our lives. And going back to that music of our formative years is really important. And especially if we're dealing with people with cognitive decline. You can bring somebody kind of back to the here and now by playing the music of their youth.
And see, I'll share. So for me, hands down, Neil Diamond. That
Yeah,
soundtrack of my youth, Neil Diamond. I know this catalog backwards and forwards, but my husband has always said to me that what he would want, I haven't asked him specifically, as you're moving on, but I know he said if he's ever in a debilitating injury, just put headphones and pump comedy. He just wants to listen to comedy to keep the energy up, the positivity. And he does love, comedians, comedy shows, funny movies, things like that.
right.
That's all he wants to listen to is comedy. So I'll ask him, when he's on his way out, would comedy still be his first
Yeah,
choice?
yeah.
Yeah.
And I mean, there are people who truly want, um, so the music is an important choice. And if I get called into a situation where the person is already non-responsive, but the family wants support, um, I just ask the family to provide a playlist of what they loved. Um, you know, or they know their person better than I do.
Mhm.
But there are other decisions, like, do you want it bright lights, and do you want, and these things can change too, because as one is dying, sometimes the skin becomes so sensitive that you don't want somebody physically touching you, even though you were a hugger before. But you might want to feel somebody crawl up in bed and, snuggle, spoon with your loved one as they're going. Or do you want to just be on your own, people in the room? Do you want them to tell stories? Do you want it to just be a quiet presence? Do you want people there as you pass, or would you rather go alone?
Mhm.
Those are important questions nobody feels comfortable talking about. And it's important to talk about it because otherwise, especially for the family, they make up stories about how things went and how, and just share, just tell them, nobody's going to be offended if you say, I'm ready to go, but I don't want you here when it happens.
Yeah. May I jump in actually with a quick personal story that is so on point with that? It's now years ago, but my grandmother, who lived to be 93, and she had reached a point where I'll just say her levels started declining, her heart started slowing. She was in this fabulous assisted living facility, and they said she needs to be taken to a hospital, and it appears that the end is near. So my aunt, thankfully, I lived very close to my grandmother, as did my aunt. And so she was there, accompanied grandma to the hospital, stayed with grandma in the hospital. Of course, my aunt wasn't planning to spend the whole day in the hospital. So now she's exhausted. I was at work or something like that. So I was going to come and see her after work, or I forget. But anyway, the hospital told my aunt, who had been there for hours, your mom will still be here for several hours. Go home, get some rest, eat some nourishing food, and then come back in a couple of hours. So my aunt said, okay. And my grandma had been hanging on, hanging on, hanging on. And I said to my aunt, oh, I'll drive to the hospital. I'll stay with grandma while you go and get some rest. My grandmother passed just moments after my aunt left. And of course, before I got there. And intuitively, I said, Grandma wanted to be alone. She didn't want to have that burden of passing away in front of her daughter and her granddaughter. So I hear you, but we never had asked Grandma that question.
Right.
But it was clear Grandma wanted to be alone. And so
But,
she waited.
and yeah, and they'll hang on forever if There are all sorts of stories about, a spouse sitting at the bedside and it looks like things are okay. They're stable. They're still breathing. It hasn't. They get up and they just go to the bathroom, right? They just a bio break and come back and they're gone. But then there are also the opposite stories where even if they're non-responsive and they couldn't like say anything, they're waiting for that child or grandchild to get off work or come home from college. Sometimes it can be days, right? If somebody's far away. Um, and then the minute they walk in the room and walk over and say, Grandma, I'm here. It's okay. Then they go. And so it's just we have more control over the timing of our death and less control, right?
Mhm.
But there are some things that are very important to us that we can sort of shift the timing a little bit so that whether it's I do I want this person one last time, you know, or I don't want witnesses when I pass over. And there's no right or wrong answer. So we actually plan the vigil and I ask all the hard questions and you don't have to answer them, but I give you the options. you know, if possible, do you want candles? If you're in a facility, there are no candles. That's not an option. So even if you want candles and but we can do soft lights and those flameless candles, right? It can look like candles. Yeah, we can decorate it to look like similar to how you want it. So as close as we can get it, we can have your environment be what you want when you pass. You know, most people, if they die at home, aren't dying in their own bed anyway. They're on hospice. There's a hospital bed in the dining room or in the living room, or so it's not perfect, but it's the best we can do. And just that quiet, calming presence at the bedside. I do have an emotional attachment to my clients. You can't do this work and not come to love them. But it doesn't have those decades of family and, things. And so I can be that non-judging, compassionate presence that not only calms the client, but it also helps their loved ones. I can answer questions about, no, they're not in pain. This is a natural process. This is kind of what the body does. And we won't go into some of the gory details, but it's not like in the movies. It just isn't. And unless you've attended someone's death, it's a surprise, it's a shock. So that's kind of broad view of what a death doula does. And I'm there for the family a little bit afterwards. I can do some of the running around. It just depends how much assistance they want, how much support is there for the person. I tend to just attract people who I like to call solo agers or elderly orphans. Either they've lost their spouse or they were never married. They don't have children, or the children, they're disconnected from their family. So their family is just their friends. And as one ages, one's friends group shrinks and the capacity to support shrinks because we're all dealing with different ailments and, you know. So depending on the level of support that the client has and what they need, there's a whole broad range of things that an end of life doula can bring. I am trained and I can offer, I can do like guided visualizations, do meditations if they're anxious. Uh, I can I can even do some energy work if they're open to it, to help. You know, there's no overcoming the terminal diagnosis, but we can help bring the body's energetic systems into balance so things kind of go more smoothly, and that helps both physically, emotionally, spiritually, if you will. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much for providing that overview. And I mean, again, it's so illuminating how there's this extraordinary service of extraordinary people, to help people with their final wishes and their final decisions, and also to manage the truck, getting that diagnosis. I mean, it's got to feel like a truck. I'm certain, as you had mentioned with your journey. Now, my next question is going to sound a little crazy at first, but it's me. And everyone who knows me knows there's always method behind the madness. So I'm actually reading a fabulous book right now on burnout. It's called Burnout, and it's written by twin sisters. Their name escapes me. It's Nagasaki or something like that. Really, really amazing book. And just this morning, I was reading a chapter, and it talked about how we can feel helpless, and there situations, life situations occur where we feel helpless. Now, of course, I coach and provide support and impact coaching to individuals who feel stuck, who feel trapped, or who feel helpless. And it's so interesting that how the dots connected for me this morning as I read this, and also how it pertains to your area and life's work. And that is to overcome a feeling of helplessness, do something, just do anything,
Right.
because you're telling your body, we're not helpless, we can achieve things. And in reading that chapter, it really resonated with me, because when I'm under times of extreme stress, I cook. And I instantly flashed back to when my mom was battling cancer and losing her battle with cancer. For the first and last time in my life, I made homemade tamales. I woke up and I said, I'm making tamales. German woman making tamales. And were they good tamales? Not necessarily, but I mean everything. I was stewing the meat, I was making the masa. I mean, it was like a multi-day, I think, production. And and then I went to my mom's house, I made tamales. Um, but I realize now I have the insight that I felt helpless. My mom was losing her battle with cancer, and that was just my body's natural instinct. Achieve something, do something. And me being me, I wanted to do something that I could give to others. So, and I show my love through baking, and I show my love through cooking. So, what I'd love to ask you about is, of course, you have the individual who, and it's a multifaceted question. You have the individual who receives the diagnosis, a terminal diagnosis. You have the family reeling that their loved one has this terminal diagnosis. Or, as you mentioned earlier, there's people who are in a life transition, whether they're not in the workforce, and what am I going to do with retirement? I don't feel productive. I don't feel like a valued member of society. Someone who might be in a forced retirement or a forced separation from a job. Talk about feeling helpless. So many, I mean, I could fill the rest of the time naming examples. So with your coaching, how do you utilize positive psychology or resilience in guiding people in ways to overcome this feeling of helplessness?
So you're absolutely right. And before I get specifically to your question, I would like to point out to you that not only did you fall back in this time of overwhelm and helplessness, this feeling, to kind of your natural, I'm going to cook something that I can offer to others, but you also proved that you weren't helpless by cooking something you'd never cooked before. You expanded your abilities. You were proactive and you said, not my favorite cinnamon bun recipe, right? That you could probably make in your sleep, but you made something from a culture you're not from that's a complex, I love tamales, but have I ever made them? No. that's That's what I treat myself to at the restaurant, right? So, so yeah, you stretched even further than you realized. You stepped outside your comfort zone and you stretched. And so that is a really good example of how do I take control when I don't know who I am even anymore. My identity is shifting. For you at that time, you know, your identity as a daughter was shifting. Your family was being reconstructed, right? Your very core family. Um, and so it doesn't matter whether you've just received a life-altering diagnosis, whether it's something that will last for years, or you've only got a few months, or if you just don't understand who you are anymore. Um, the burnout, you can't keep doing this, but I don't know what else to do, or just any number of a multitude of things that life can throw at you, and all of a sudden your past world is irrelevant, but you don't know where you're going. And so I got lots and lots of tools, that we can play with, but my coaching really leans into um, curiosity, compassion, and community. So the curiosity part is, what can I do with this? What's here for me? How is this? How can I use this to my benefit? Because there are some, you know, if we're talking about a terminal diagnosis or like a cancer diagnosis, mine was only stage 3. I didn't consciously know this, but I automatically leaned into it. It's like, okay, this is my wake up call. How am I going to use this for good? Right? I don't know. How do you define good? Everybody defines it differently. But for me, it was how to make sure that my life was relevant. And I think that is for a lot of people. And so it takes a long time to develop curiosity as a natural response. But in working with it over time, you shift from the, oh no, how am I going to recover? How am I going to get back to normal, to being, oh, what am I going to create from here? It's still a shock, it's still traumatic, but in reality, we have to face whatever it was that hit us. And how do I move forward with that? Now, if moving forward as normal as you could possibly be is important to you, then sure, figure out how you can, you know, somebody, because of a life-altering diagnosis has an amputation or something, then sure, lean into the prosthetics, learn how to walk again, do the things. That's fine. But the it doesn't have to be that way if you're willing to lean forward and say, okay, this is a chance for me to recreate who I am, what I do. So let's be curious about it. You don't have to have the answers right away. Just, okay, let me try this. Does it work? So it's kind of like you're cooking something new. You know, small steps. You don't have to solve it all at once. And that's where the compassion comes in, compassion for yourself, compassion for the circumstances you're in. You have to be real. You have to acknowledge. You can't just blindly go, it's okay, it'll go away. But really care for yourself and the people around you, um, and the circumstances. Make the best, not in a Pollyanna-ish way, but given the circumstances we're in now, how can I support myself? What do I need in order to take the next step forward? Okay. And then the third component to that is community. And excuse me, some water. That third component, community, can be the community that you already have around yourself. It can be the community that of like people in similar circumstances that, like with a health diagnosis, there are all sorts of support groups, right? That you can lean into. It could be if you're just going through a life change, it could be a community that you just gather around yourself of people who are supportive of you, the people that you know or you are. So it's not just lean into the friends who support you or the family, but it's also lean into the people who are there who can support you that you never noticed before. There are new people coming into your life who would love to be part of your life and support you, no matter what the circumstances. Terrible breakup, divorce, you've moved. Well, then, yes, you've moved out of your house, you're in an apartment, but get to know your neighbors. You can support them in small ways. They can support you. You gather people around you, and there's always some weeding to be done. You find the people who you thought were your best support in this circumstance just don't have the capacity to do it. Maybe it's too raw of a topic for them, or they don't have the emotional capacity to deal with whatever. But yeah, you can't do it alone. You need support. A coach or a doula is a wonderful tool, but we're not your whole support group. We're not your whole support system. And be open to having support that's not just a cohesive group. It isn't just the friend group. There will be specific friends out of the friend group, and then there will be specific people from, I don't know, places you worked 2 jobs ago, that you had connected with. Reach out to people. And really, that's great life advice, but especially in moments of trauma or upset or burnout. And I know that when you're, especially in the topic of the book, burnout, when you're burnt out or when you're depressed, the energy to do anything seems insurmountable. So you do the tiniest things. You just lean in with curiosity, be willing to not see that this is maybe the best thing that ever happened to you. It can be the hardest and most, horrible thing that ever happened to you. But it did happen. And how are we going to use it for our benefit? With
I love that.
compassion and love and tiny, tiny steps.
Mm-hmm.
And lean on everybody that's offering a shoulder or a hand.
Mm-hmm. That's so beautifully shared with the community, and thank you for that. A lot of things that I'll help my clients with, and I've even done myself, is you define what is the worst thing that can happen. And am I prepared for it? And I always say, and never forget that you have the power of choice. So even if the worst thing is happening to you, you can choose how you react to it. You can choose the small steps that you take to get out of it. You can't stop life from throwing you some pretty awful curveballs. You and I have both had our own
Yeah.
experiences, and everyone has had their pathways. It's how you choose to catch that curveball And then, whether you knock it out the park, you hit a slow ground or the short, but hit that curveball and then run to first. I love, in our other conversation, I did a baseball analogy. It's who I
Yes.
am.
But
But
yeah,
I know we're getting close to wrapping up time, and I love that you did mention energy. And of course, with my clients, I do a lot of and my weekly postings, I do a lot of educating on the importance of understanding your energy. And I think you have a very special and wonderful gift to share with our listeners.
yes. So I offer a free 5 series email course sent over the course of 2 weeks. So it's roughly every other day, but there are a couple places where it's every 3 days, just to give you a chance to practice and integrate. And this course is called Energy Calibration: Grounding, Balancing, and Realigning During Times of Change. So it offers practical energetic tools and meditative practices to help you restore clarity, resilience, and vitality during life transitions or just because.
That's
One
wonderful.
person's life transition might be another person's Wednesday afternoon. You know,
Mhm. Yes. Well, and thank you for providing that to our nonprofits. Sorry, to our listeners. And I was thinking, when you said one person's life change could be another person's Wednesday afternoon, um, it's probably bad of me, but nonprofit environments are extremely busy. There's the crisis du jour. I mean, there you go in with your plan, and by 10 a.m. your plan is thrown out the window because
right.
of all the chaos that has come your way. And I would just always say, it's a day that ends in Y. Just
Yeah.
sort of in a way, it's normalizing it, and it's saying, we can ruminate and stress about it, or we just tackle it and block and tackle and triage it and move
Yeah.
forward.
So
Yeah,
this is just one more set of tools in being able to move forward. And
I
yeah,
love. Yeah. Well, Samantha, as always, one thing I really love about this new evolution of what I'm doing with my life after working in the nonprofit sector for 30 plus years is the extraordinary people that I'm meeting along the way. And you are just the epitome, you embody the authenticity, the finding your calling. You walk your walk and you talk your talk. And it just, it's such a pleasure because you yourself, everything you do, you have curiosity, you have compassion, you create community. And for you to just live and embody your values that you bring to yourself and to your clients, it is truly an honor and a pleasure to be in your world and to learn from your expertise. And thank you so much for being here today and sharing your insights with my community. And really, you do extraordinary work, and I'm very fortunate to know you.
yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie. And if you hadn't guessed, you're one of my community that I've roped in, along the way. It's hard to build communities as an adult, and so that is a skill that we all need to lean into. And I'm so glad that we met.
Yeah, yeah, ditto. You're not getting rid of me, that's for sure.
Yeah.
So, well, excellent. Well, thank you again so very much. I'll include your link to your amazing, wonderful energy calibration offer in the show notes, as well as your website. So, if people would like to find you or learn more about you, all of that will be included in the show notes. So, thank you again for your time today. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Carrie. This was lovely. Bye.
Okay, bye bye.